Hello and welcome to Finally Friday. This chat session is run by EXARC, the Society for Archaeological Open-Air Museums, Experimental Archaeology, Ancient Technology and Interpretation. My name is Matilda Siebrecht, and today I am joined by two specialists focusing on the archaeology of music and soundscapes of archaeology. Simon Wyatt is an experimental archaeologist with interests in basket weaving and pottery, although his central focus is on the archaeology of music. His research covers a range of topics related to this theme, including the advent of music in the Paleolithic, the variety of objects that could have been used to create music in the past, and the significance of location when playing instruments. He is also interested in recent developments in sensory archaeology and anthropology, as well as considering the neuropsychology of the musical experience. Lara Komis is a PhD candidate in experimental archaeology at University College Dublin. Her central research focuses on the use of experimental archaeology in open-air museums using social science methods and citizen science approaches. She is also the founder of Abadir, a SoundCloud channel that aims to share soundscapes of the human past through experimental archaeology, ancient technology, and reenactment. So, welcome to both of you. I have one quick question, hopefully an easy one to get you started in this discussion. Although you're both approaching the topic from slightly different angles, both of you are very obviously involved with investigating sound. How did that investigation start, and why do you think it's important to look at sound?
Well, as a child, my parents made me join a choir, and I was forced to also play violin from an early age. So I've always been aware, even if I didn't make nice noises, I was aware of them. And as an undergraduate, my dissertation supervisor was a specialist in the TRB, the Trichterbecker culture, which is the first Neolithic on the North European plain. And the thing about the TRB culture is for about 600 years, from 3300 down to 2700 BC, it's full of finds of ceramic objects which are generally interpreted by archaeologists to be drums. And once I found that out, I was stuck for life, I think. Why it's important? I think music archaeology is the term that is generally used nowadays, but it relates to the sensory approaches that have come to the fore recently in anthropology and in museum studies. And it's just one of the ones that I think it can probably be used more easily in a museum space to present it to people than having things that are smelly or things that they can touch and perhaps damage. And I think this sensory appeal, it comes down to perception, which is constructed from our sensory interaction from all the means: touch, smell, hearing, sight, and bound together with our previous experience. And what's impressive is that I think that all these different senses, they can affect the way they each work. So, for example, if we're warm, when we feel warm, it actually has been shown to increase our interpersonal warmth. We're more friendly to other people. Even if when we get round to attempting to make sound with the objects, it's not what modern people might term to be music, it brings us closer to our ancestors, I think. And in fact, I think we could go further and say that when we perceive sound, we're perceiving an intentional agency. The premotor cortex area of our brain is activated when we are perceiving that some other agent is acting or communicating, say, with us. In ethnomusicology, there's a lady called Elizabeth Talbot. She says that we sense music as though it's a voice, and it's a type of communication. Or we all have an idea in our head of the sound of flint knapping. Now, in Britain, some Neolithic long barrows have large piles of flint flakes deposited in the ditches. But when they were excavated and the flakes were studied, they were found that they could be put back together and no physical object had been removed from the nodule of flint. So the knapping was not being done to produce tools. And perhaps we might think that you wouldn't do that in the ditch of the burial mound of your ancestors anyway. But perhaps the sound was the important thing. The knapping was done, so the sound existed in the burial site.
That's really interesting. That actually very much relates, I think, to what your research focuses on, Lara. Am I correct?
First of all, thank you for having me. This is a very good thing to do, especially when we are dealing with sound and the link with the past through sensory aspects. I'm not actually very much interested in sound. So my interest in setting it up in SoundCloud, the avenue that brought me here and trying to open this account in SoundCloud was not actually to research the sounds themselves as they are. It was more an intent of sharing things with people and also bringing together people that belong to the academic side of the world and also people who don't belong to the academic side of the world and can contribute a lot, especially with the sensory perspectives from on the past. So I think that sound, among all the senses, is the one. I perfectly agree with what Simon said before. It really speaks an international language. So if we were to use this metaphor of language, it is really nice that sound was associated with the voice and not with the word. So it is different, like with animals. We could recognize an animal from the voice, even if animals do not use word to express themselves, So I think that soundscapes, like mine, are basically soundscapes like raw materials. So they can be interpreted, they can be also listened to in a wider way, in a more open way. They can also speak to people who have no background in archaeology. They have no background in music. It's an internationally understood language. And this is one of the aspects, because I chose sound as a mean in the research perspective through the sensory aspect. The second is that I was actually looking forward to help the experimental archaeology, reenactment, and archaeological open air community during lockdown. And I thought that soundscapes could really be something that could help everyone in their own little places. They could have a connection to the internet. You don't need a subscription to the SoundCloud server. And it was also something that I did because I wanted people to have a chance to listen and to contribute. So in 2 words, what I'm trying to do is actually setting up a citizen science project, bringing together the highest standard researchers and the normal, inverted commas, the normal people who maybe are hobbyists, are bricolage amateurs in ancient technology, or are reenactors and can contribute to this.
So very different angles of the research into sound or music of the past, but obviously a very important one at that. And as this episode is focused on the sound of music, we thought it would be a great possibility to share some of your work with the listeners. So Simon, is there one in particular that you think we should start with that's an interesting reproduction that you've made, for example?
The simplest, which is, should we say, less rigorous, is here I have a recording of a model of 2 of the drums of the TRB culture from about 3000 BC. And over the top, I've recorded a very primitive mouth bow, which is a piece of hazel stick and tied with a piece of ivy. And then I've got 2 different size cow horns. One's a side blown, one's an end blown. But I think it comes together quite nicely.
That's very cool. Can I ask a quick question? Ignorance of horn morphology. So you mentioned there that we had 2 cow horns. Do they have to be different sizes or different shapes in order to make the different pitches?
Yeah, the longer a tube is, the deeper the fundamental pitch is. So one of those is, I'd say, maybe 2.5, 3 feet long. So just about 90 centimeters. And the smaller one is about 35, 40 centimeters. The short one has a hole in the end, so it's blown almost like a trumpet. The second one has a hole about 15 centimeters from the end. And what I've done there is, horn doesn't survive very well in archaeological record, but in the Bronze Age, particularly, Ireland is famous for bronze cast horns. They come in pairs. One is side blown, and the one with it is end blown. So what I did was made an assumption that perhaps the precursors would have had a side blown end as well. So that's where I went with that. I think the bigger it is, you have to alter your playing technique. The smaller horn, you can play in the style of a lip reed instrument like a trumpet. So quite tight. But the bigger one, because it's got a larger mouth hole, when you blow, you have to play in a more relaxed way, more like a didgeridoo. And it's, I think, less strain on your body.
Well, thanks for sharing, Simon. I'm always amazed at how talented musicians can be in reproducing potential sounds of the past. But of course, Lara, you work, as you mentioned, with soundscapes. Perhaps you have an example of one. Maybe you can also explain exactly what a soundscape is.
Yes, so the major difference is two major differences is that I am not the author. So my project is basically set up to make people share what they actually recorded, or, they authored, if they created a piece of art based on ancient tools. And the second is that the soundscapes that I share are not exactly recorded for a purpose. So they might be accidentally recorded. So this is why I was referring to them as raw materials. Previous projects that were using soundscapes in the world of archaeology, especially one project about the Mesolithic, is exactly doing that kind of mapping the soundscapes of the Mesolithic. Their project was basically aimed to be shared in museum settings only, or used for further research, so but there the project is basically trying to bring people together and discuss things. One of the most important for me is the flint axes working wood at Batzer Asian Farm. So if you want, we can just play it now.
Very, very cool.
This was recorded in Batzer Asian Farm, and it was actually played during the Berlin conference, the online conference that we had at the end of March by Trevor Creighton. And he was the one that actually pointed how important soundscapes were, even if, again, it's something that is not orchestrated, it's something that is surrounding us, and you could hear the voices of the people around and the different pitches of the different tools and the resonance of the wood. It's something that can actually be perceived. What do you think, Simon, about it? Do you hear that kind of different pitches?
Oh yeah, it's almost like a rhythmic track. It's quite remarkable. I remember as a kid going to a French, I think it was called a woodcutters festival, and it was in the Alps. And there was just tons of guys standing around with axes chopping trees. And the sound was quite a phenomenal experience, because it really gets into your head, that repetitive rhythmic sound.
Yes, yes. And the fact that this is actually a resonance, it made me think back of a story that is told about Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher.
Yeah.
When he passed near a blacksmith, and he could hear the differences in sound. And then after doing a lot of tests, he actually discovered harmony, basically. And of course, it would be fantastic. I have to say that all the tracks that have been uploaded in Abadir are under a Creative Commons. So basically, everyone can use them. And it's a nice thing to advise the people that actually did the recording. So if you click the single tracks, you will find a thorough description of where it was recorded, by whom, and in case there is an author, you can use them for making whatever you want. Absolutely, it would be fantastic.
I think modern music is often over-engineered. When it sounds as you would have it, more raw, there's something quite magical in that. There's a music archaeologist called Graham Lawson. He suggests that this ability to pay attention to changes in senses as we are working with objects and feeling the change and hearing the changes, that you can, like the way that wood was resonating with those axes. He proposed maybe that sound objects were in fact possibly driving changes in technology. His key example is an object which I would actually believe probably is a flute, from a cave in Germany called Geissenklösterle, and it's made from mammoth ivory. These people, around 43,000 BC, they were taking a tusk of a mammoth, shaping it, and then splitting it open, hollowing it, and gluing it back together. It's quite a bizarre thing to do when there are far more easy options available to you. And I suppose it shows the value of music, but also maybe music is driving changes that were happening in technology at the time.
That's really, really interesting what you were saying, because I feel that the aesthetics, it's really aesthetic like pleasure, that can also be linked to sound and music. I think it was with human beings from the start. I mean, we know that already. So we see it for the visual arts, example, I wonder why, we have still doubts about the fact that we're putting a lot of efforts in trying to find the pleasing sound. So choosing the right material, doing a lot of work to obtain the sound that they wanted. There was recently a master's student here at the University of Dublin, and he was investigating a bronze disc. So he was basically heating the bronze after he was heated on the forge, and then with a hammer, the tones were changing a bit. So I actually took my phone with an app that measures hertz, trying to figure out when the sound changed, because probably when the sound changed, the temperature was too low, so it couldn't beat it anymore. So this feeds back to the sensory archaeology. And what I'm trying to do from a methodological perspective in experimental archaeology is actually to frame these aspects, so the sensory aspects, into some experiments, and recognizing that they have a very important indicator role. So whether they are driving changes or they're signaling a change in temperature or whatever it is, which is linked with all the senses, of course. As they say, it's an assemblage. It's all the sensors together.
Ears and eyes. I'd like to pick up on your comment on aesthetics. I'm a huge fan of an anthropologist called John Blacking, and he was thinking of all the behaviors we have, which we use for not necessarily musical, but things we do that are rhythmic, and therefore, in a sense, they are musical. And he pinpointed symmetrical hand axes from the Paleolithic. And he suggested that these are objects of immense beauty. And for them to have conceived of this, he suggests that first of all, it's a rhythmic process to manufacture the axe, but it would also be a sonic process. And he suggests that not only is the axe, therefore, it's a reflection of conceptual thought, but maybe being able to do something rhythmic and produce something symmetrical actually was one of the steps towards our first production of conceptual thought, when we truly became, as Ellen Dissanayaka, she has a book called Homo Aestheticus. Maybe that was one of the peaks of our evolution, becoming an aesthetic person.
So maybe we could listen to another of your pieces, Simon. I know that you prepared a couple for us. Is there one that you would like to go to next?
The one called the Isteritz Playing Techniques. So there's a cave in the western end of the Pyrenees, which is renowned in archaeology because it has an immense stratigraphic record. And the cave is called Isteritz, and inside it, they discovered the fragments of 22 vulture bones with holes in them. And most of them are fragmentary. In the 1990s, Dominique Buisson was going through the finds from these original excavations, and he found a fragment of a vulture bone that was from an excavation. The catalogue number suggests it was 1913. And he found a fragment in a different box from a different excavation from 1939. And they fitted together. And it is, as far as I know currently, it is the most complete prehistoric aerophone there is. An aerophone is a wind instrument. So it is broken in the middle, but it fits together. The top end, presumably the end we would use as the embouchure, and the bottom end are fairly intact. So we know the actual length, and we know it has 4 finger holes. Now, the first publications of it suggested that it was maybe a pot for keeping needles in. But it's generally accepted today that it is a wind instrument. But again, we don't know what their aesthetics were when it comes to sound. And so we don't know how it was sounded. And it can be done in many different ways. So the recording we're about to hear presents a series of different ways of sounding this bone. This is made on a cast model of it, not in the original bone. First of all, it's the sound of just your fingertips slapping onto the holes. Then it's played as a diagonal flute blowing on the top left hand of the embouchure hole. Then it's played in the Iranian way, which is an interdental technique, placing the edge in between the gap that your top incisors have, and blowing across your tongue, which you have placed slightly diagonally down to your bottom left canine. That gives a very wispy sound. Then it's played like a Japanese shakuhachi, which can give far more emotion. There's techniques there where you can add things like vibrato, and so you can hear that there. Then it's followed by playing it as a lip reed instrument or a trumpet. And finally, I cheated and recorded it twice with a reed, so it plays a little duet.
Okay, so a lot to look forward to. Also, I'm really curious how many people tried to make that whistling noise with their incisors, because I know that I definitely was just trying to do those things with my mouth. So let's see what it hears like from a professional musician. Wow, it's amazing that one instrument can make so many different sounds.
It's not only that, I can play it upside down as a flute, and it does give a whole new dimension to that as well. So you could play either way on that object.
It is absolutely amazing to see the versatility of one reconstruction and to see how it can really turn a creative output when put in the right hands. Because if it was for me, I don't know all the different ways that you can play a flute.
When I started with a goose bone in about 2008, and it took me 6 months of horrible noises before I got the embouchure to work, playing as a diagonal flute. So it has taken me 12 years to get to the point where I can demonstrate those different options.
The last part of the recording that we just heard really reminded me of the tia, the flutes that were played in the ancient Mediterranean, brought from the Greek and Roman sites, actually Etruscan in the middle. It's something that has got a little bit of memory also to it, or association. And I think that, this exercise that we're doing today is really also seeing where does this sound tackle something in my memory, tackle something of my culture or things like this. And this is why I believe that sound is such a good tool for communicating and engaging people, basically. And then I must say that, I want to see the reproduction that you're playing, because I'm really curious now about this artifact, which otherwise I would not maybe be so intrigued with if I didn't hear the recording. You know what I mean? This sound really reminded me of another thing that's been published in Abadir. This is not an experimental archaeology project. It was actually recorded by me with no filters, no nothing. So it's a very rough kind of sound for an Etruscan reenactment. I was trying to convey the idea of the fersu. The fersu was an important character in ritual activities that usually were performed in funerary practices. This character is always dancing and playing. There's always music. So, of course, we don't have any written sources about ancient music. And in Italy, there are very fantastic groups working on the reconstruction of sound and music in the ancient world, like Sinaulia, for example. And this one, I think, really reminded me about the last part of the recording that you had, Simon. So if you want, we can just listen to it briefly.
Love to. Absolutely, yeah. Magnificent, that is.
And those were replicated instruments as well.
Yes, those are replicated instruments, and they're played during this kind of parade. It was performed at ritual sacrifices and dances that were carried out, usually for ceremonies after someone died in the ancient Etruscan world. And this group has basically taken what they had and trying to reconstruct both the dancing and the sounds. You can hear in the recording maybe that this group is passing by. And there is people chatting, and I think it was a very good soundscape, this one, because it also gives the human activity, and it's not just work, this one. It's not like someone who's building a tool or constructing something, actually celebrating something with other people. So really appreciate the contribution that reenactors have in this world. And if I was looking at them from a citizen science perspective, reenactors should be called the makers. And I think they have a lot to contribute. What was said before about soundscapes in the article by Ben Elliott in the Sensory Archaeology Handbook was that it was probably necessary to go out of the comfort zone of the conventional, academic practice. I think that sound can be a fantastic way to also bridge and start a dialogue among people who are not professionals, researchers, but maybe they are professional actors or craft people, and bringing them all together. In open archaeological museums, that would be the best. But of course, this is just the first step of the project.
I think getting more people involved that way, especially ones who are so engaged to attempt to produce sound, is really crucial. They have an idea in ethnomusicology they call bimusicality, where you try and understand objects through their practical use. And I think some knowledge, it relies on producing sound and developing abilities and exploring the subtlety and the nuance you can get from an object. And many academics don't verge on that side. There are lots who do, but I think it's really, really important to get into the sound.
Yes, indeed.
On which note, I believe your third piece that you prepared for us today, Simon, has something a bit related to that.
Do you want me to say it first, or should we listen first and then I'll speak?
This one, actually, it might be interesting to say it afterwards.
This is an attempt to create a soundscape, but I have, what should I say? I've telescoped time. So the sounds are the manufacturing of a swan bone instrument and the playing in different techniques, but put together all at the same time.
Sounds intriguing. Let's give it a listen. Oh, I thought we were going to start hearing some techno there at the beginning.
It's fantastic. Can I say something? It's great. This is just great. This is a work of art.
Thank you. The idea is one day when I get a recording of an actual swan call, I will add that at the beginning. So thinking of objects as sound producers rather than instruments, there's a way of making a noise with a bone, which is instead of blowing, you suck, and you do it really quite rapidly. So you make almost a kissing sound as you pull air in, and it produces that sound at the beginning. And people interpret them, where they're found, as trying to make an animal call, presumably in hunting, to draw them to you. So I started with my hope of sounding like a bit like a swan. Then I simply put the whole end of the bone, which has 3 holes, in my mouth and just blow. And so I'm not making an embouchure like any form of wind instrument, but because there are 3 holes which are cut in the bone, they have very fine edges, and if you move your fingers, you get a sort of very weird sort of wispy sound. Then I carry on the blowing and very quickly move my tongue to block the end, and you get that sort of slapping sound. And I moved on to playing it with a flute embouchure, and finally, again, I'm a sucker for making a duet, so it's the same bone with a little reed stuck in the end with a bit of beeswax, and then played as a little duet. But I carry on the little bird calls over the top. But it's all placed over the recording of me cutting that bone with a piece of flint and then scraping the finger holes out, it's very nice. I like that sound. It's almost like a little rasp.
I think you can actually perceive the rotational movement. Did you drill it?
No, it's not drilling. It's scraping down because they're slightly beveled.
Okay. So it's scraping.
Yeah. So I'm guessing my flint wasn't perfect, and the bone has imperfections, and you get this very sort of raspy noise, which is quite cool, I think. And it's because it finished on a sort of a tune. Hence it starts off a bit messy, and hence the title of Ugly Duckling.
Great. So, Lara, if you have one more that you'd like to share, then we've had 3 from both of you, and then we can finish off and get to the live session.
Let's move to something very, very soft. It's an activity was performed here. It was a workshop on dry felting. It's a very soft sound, and I realized I was actually doing this workshop, and I was actually participating. So I had my needle and I was doing my thing. And then I realized that everyone was silent. It was possible to hear this fantastic soundscape of people doing the same activity together with all their different rhythms and very concentrated, and it was a very peaceful moment. So yes, I would like to share this with you.
That's a really ingenious thing to do. I'm kicking myself. I made a felt waistcoat, and I never thought of recording the sound.
No, Simon, that's it. That's exactly it. Sometimes we are engaged in activities. We're so engaged, we cannot really pay attention also to the sounds that we're making.
If you do, though, when it's such a quiet sound, it really draws you in, and it's a meditative experience.
This is why I think also paying attention to the little details, and maybe just having your phone over there and do a voice recording with the normal thing that you have in the phone sometimes can really turn something. Even if, again, it wasn't the scope, it wasn't of me recording a soundscape during this workshop, but yet I could see, I could perceive this kind of rhythmic patterns. And I think it's interesting. Again, it's a soundscape. It's something that really doesn't need to be rearranged. And the human activities is basically the background for it.
I think it's the sort of sound, though, that once you grow up and you hear it again and you remember lying with your parents when that was being done, it would suck you back into your childhood.
Yes, I believe that, the sensory aspect is so precise when drawing back memories, especially, again, sound, as you said, but also the sense of smell is very, very powerful, for example. So people that come over and see a demonstration of an ancient technology activity, for example, that uses charcoal burning or other things like that, and they smell it and they always say, I remember that my grandfather or, something else happened in my past, and it actually had the same exact smell, and that triggers back. Can you tell me something more about that, Simon?
About triggering smells or
the memories? From what you were saying before, that you are interested also in the neurological kind of aspects of sound. Does it have something to deal with memories, and how does it work?
I've read a guy who I correspond with in America called Clint Goss, and he did a piece of work where they were recording brainwave frequencies. He suggests that when you're focused on playing a flute, it lowers your brainwave frequencies, to what are known as delta waves. And we have delta wave activity in our brains during non-REM sleep. And that is the point of sleep when our brain is constructing memories from our previous day's experiences. So I'm wondering if when you're making sounds and you're in that moment, maybe that's why when we grow up, we are able to suddenly jump back. It's because our brain has entered a delta wave state and our brains are focused on constructing memories at that moment.
Oh, so if someone says you play the flute like a dream, it really is like a dream.
Of all the things you can play, I think along with the discussion of sensory archaeology, there's a big movement at the moment. Everything has become talked of. Everyone talks of embodiedness or embodiment. And by that, it's, our whole perception changes. Our body becomes extended maybe. And there's a point when you're playing an instrument where you're sensing of touch, say when you're playing a violin. It's not in your hands. Your point of the extremity of yourself is the point of your bow where it is on the string. And I think with a flute, where the point of sound production is your breath, I think that is the nearest thing to a voice. And flutes can evoke such emotion is quite astounding. But the fact that it's the sound production is the thing that keeps you alive, I think that is why it has such a primeval tug on it.
So I'm going to ask you one more question. First, on behalf of EXARC, thank you, first of all, for a really interesting discussion. This was a little bit of a different format to what we've done before. I think it was fantastic. It was really nice to have the context behind all these pieces that you made. And like Lara was saying, I wouldn't necessarily be as interested sort of before, but now that I know what it is, I'm definitely really interested. And yeah, so it's the same for me, same for a lot of our listeners as well, about the pieces that you have both presented here. So a final question before we open this up to our listeners. What are your plans for the future, and how can the EXARC community help to make a difference for you in regards to the points that you discussed today or for your future plans?
For the future, I'm always working on perfecting my reed making, which I adore and my wife thinks sounds like a drunk mosquito. And I'm also I'm on making a model of the Geitsen-Klösterler mammoth ivory flute, which is a lot more time consuming than I ever imagined. What EXARC could do. I was at the EXARC conference in St Fagans in Wales a few years ago, and I thought, they should have had archaeology music for the evening. I thought, what a missed opportunity.
No, Simon, absolutely. Push for it. Yes, we need more archaeology of music in EXARC. I agree with that.
Yeah, in all of the talks we've had, it's always alluded to, but this is the first one that's really focused on the sensory aspect. And I mean, you're talking about smells as well, so that could be something interesting there.
So, the thing that I wanted just to say is, first of all, thank you for having me again. And for the future, the project Abadir, the page is going to be there for at least another year. And I think with EXARC, what I will probably ask, and who knows, maybe during the live session of this Finally Friday, be to have a call out there and basically try to involve as much as possible, trying to involve all the groups and experimental archaeologists and open archaeological museums too. They did already, so you can actually see a few soundscapes that were recorded in open archaeological museums to contribute on this page. And this is the scope, the future of this project that I'm just seeing in perspective. Is going to last 1 year only. And after that, I would need to see whether I can go further, because I should be finishing my PhD, so that it's going to be a little bit more difficult to find resources to carry on in some other ways. I think, EXARC is the perfect platform to share this new attention to sensory aspects in experimental archaeology.
So we will now be having a live question and answer session with people who have been listening in to the discussion so far. So let me go to the first question here from Caroline, a question for both Lara and Simon. What kinds of soundscapes and music archaeology recordings are you most interested in hearing or collecting? So you mentioned at the end, for example, Lara, that you wanted to give a call to arms, so to speak, for this thing.
Yes, if I can answer this question, and thank you, Caroline, for it. Again, in my perspective, I'm very curious about everything. So I am not specifically looking forward for a specific thing. I'm actually more happy if I can expand the spectrum of Soundscape. So if anyone wants to come and, give their contribution, they can contact me at Lara Komis 73@gmail.com, and we can have a chat about that. It's basically, you can take a look at the tracks in SoundCloud and see what is the information that I required. And it is possible to choose what kind of copyright you have. Since, it's a non-profit project, and I would like to see actually research being performed on what was shared, rather than focusing on one single aspect, I think.
I'd like to see people recording everything. I made a nice recording just last week. In our garden, we have a bird box, and it's been abandoned by the birds, but apparently some bumblebees have taken up residence, and I got a really nice recording of bumblebees. They're just sitting there in the evening, buzz away.
So natural sounds. That actually relates to this next question from Ligiri. She says, mind-blowing sounds by the Isturitz flute, and playing these sounds inside the Isturitz cave itself or any other cave where there are places with powerful resonance should have made a great impression to the human ear and the human spirit. Have you examined this aspect of music and soundscape, so the natural environment's potential combined with the instruments and with voice?
I participated in the Songs of the Caves project about 6 or 7 years ago, and I actually had the opportunity of sitting in banished caves in Cantabria next to amazing art for a week and making sounds. If you check out the Songs of the Cave website, which is a WordPress site, you can see a video of part of the project and also quite a few recordings in lovely caves, some of which people can visit, some which aren't open to the public. And it is playing an instrument in a cave next to art that's perhaps 40,000 years old. It's quite a remarkable experience. And I think the acoustic of place can really trigger things within you when you're playing sounds, which create something very special. I sit at home and I play bones and I play other instruments, and, it can be fun, but rather mundane. And when you step into a place which has an impressive acoustic, suddenly, subconsciously, you're inspired, and what you play is just quite different, quite existential and beautiful.
If I can add something to this question, it is a very, very interesting work that was done, and I have listened to a lot of the Songs of the Caves that Simon was referring to, but there is also an ongoing ERC project. It's called Art Soundscapes altogether, based in Barcelona. And also there has been a lot of research also being done just on the soundscapes of archaeological sites. So there is another thread, is like another branch of this. So what is the actual resonance? What are the sounds of the monuments, of archaeological sites? And I think it's very, very nice when all these things come together. So we'd invite you to listen to the soundscape from this Mesolithic archaeology project, which is about 30 minutes long. It's like a journey, and that moves through the sound, the landscape. You can hear the landscape. You can hear the human actions. You can hear the animals. Sorry for this lapsus between hear and see. And it's really an experience that it goes beyond the single person. As Simon said, it goes beyond time. It's an amazing experience. That's it.
Well, it is interesting when you say there was, the link between hearing and seeing, as you were saying in your discussion earlier. It's that the sort of memories, you can already see something if you can hear it. I will move on to the next question from Giovanna. When they were doing their PhD research, they did a lot of hammering on metal, and they became very interested in entrainment, the influence of rhythmic sound on activities. I found that when I was hammering, others would fall into a similar rhythm without thinking about it. Entrainment was outside their research area, but they never lost interest in the phenomenon. So Giovanna would be interested in what you guys think about entrainment as part of the soundscape.
Well, I must say that it is a very interesting thing, and I think it should be researched more. And, it would be a perfect occasion for doing research on this would be to run a workshop, for example, on whatever activity that makes sound. So there are many activities that make sound in an open archaeological museum. So Giovanna, you could do a workshop in one of the archaeological museums around the world with, 20 participants. And we could record what happens. So we could actually gather some data on it. It would be really nice to run this experiment, actually. Thank you for this observation. About you, Simon, what do you think about it?
Well, actually, it makes me think of something that I should have said when you asked me about memory, which is that entrainment is when things sort of move in sync with each other. I think originally it was first identified a couple of 100 years ago, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he noticed that if you put proper clocks, that's wind-up ones, in a room together, and you give it time, they all end up working in time together. And it's the same with people, and sound is one of the things that drives it forward. There's lots of research just in the last few years that explore this. So they show that when a musician plays, the different regions of their brain become synchronized with the same brainwave patterns. And not only that, they show that brainwave patterns synchronization occurs between musicians playing together. And what's further interesting there is that some neuroscientists have recently done research where they give quite gentle electrical stimulation to the surface of the head, and they show that by using electrical pulses, they can synchronize, again, different regions of the brain. But once brainwave patterns are synchronized, the brain is able to communicate more competently, it's more efficient, and people remember better. They've particularly shown that when brain waves in different regions of the brain are in sync, it boosts your episodic memory. So therefore, for your question about memory, by becoming entrained, we are encouraging ourselves to remember things.
To you, just related to that, I have a quick question. In terms of this sort of link with memory, how do you think that we can use this sort of idea or this research area further in topics such as cultural heritage, open-air museums, a sort of deeper investigation of this?
Well, again, since the approach that I have in this project is citizen science, so it is basically a project that aims to turn into a co-created knowledge about the past. It would be in open archaeological museums, again, that I see the most potential, and bringing together the research perspective. I'm not even sure now what about the sensory aspects of it, but that doesn't mean that other aspects of research to be left out. So there are many levels that we can see in an activity carried out in an archaeological museum with people. Call them visitors, call them community, call them citizens. It doesn't matter. So there is a lot of potential over there. And in my perspective, my aim, my scope would be really to co-create together a vision of the past.
That sounds quite wonderful, yeah. I carried out a little project where I presented museum visitors with sounds that I'd recorded to go with particular objects. And I asked them to look at the objects first and then come back and we chatted. And then I gave them a recording to listen to while they re-looked at the different objects. And their reactions were quite astounding. It made it far more vivid for them. And some, they imagined themselves sitting there beside these people by a fire, dancing, really brought up their own memories and combined it with what was presented by the museum itself about the objects.
I can imagine that would really definitely, like you say, bring it to life, so to speak. We just have more of a comment from Rig saying, I'm always interested in how the background sounds lead into music. So when smelting iron, getting a constant air pressure on the bellows is key. So I sing with the bellows to keep the beat. Actually, I think I've observed this also in sort of ethnographic studies, especially in traditional blacksmithing, smelting, I suppose, so to keep the air pressure. So that's also similar to what you were both saying before. Lucy-Anne has a question for Simon. With the vulture ulnar bone pipe, a lot of the more recent research I have read, such as some of that produced by EMAP, suggests that it was most likely to have been a kind of clarinet with a birch bark reed. I was wondering what your thoughts are on this and why either that or other solutions might be more likely, and additionally, what kind of reeds were you using on the reproduction that you made?
It depends on which instrument you are referring to, because the EMAP site for anyone listening, EMAP is the European Music Archaeology Project, which has been touring Europe for several years, multiple reconstructions of various period instruments. Now, the one you've just heard, the Isteritz pipe, is made from an ulna, a vulture, which is quite fat. It's as fat as my little finger at the narrow end, and that the wider bore of a tube is, the more likely I think it is to be played as a flute. The narrower it is, the more likely it is to maybe have a reed inserted. That's not a strict thing though. And the model I think you're referring to at the EMAP project website is the Geissen Klosterle, and it is a vulture bone, but it's not a vulture ulnar, it's a vulture radius, which is much more narrow. The internal bore is maybe 5, it's not nice and cylindrical at all, but it's probably about 5 millimeters, maybe 6 at some points or 4 at others. And that find actually has almost a double notched end. And I've made several versions of that and spent years sitting. And I really do mean years sitting, trying to play that as a flute. And on the vulture bone versions, I can barely get any notes, 2 or 3 at the most, and it's such a struggle. But the fact that it has this wedge-shaped edge makes it quite reminiscent of a clarinet. And I have made models of that where I've made a reed with bone. I tried a piece of horn. Horn's quite nice. And I've tried a very fine pared down sliver of feather. It's Jean-Luc Ringo who has made a model with birch bark that you're referring to. But as I say, that one I can't play as the flute, but I can play it with a reed. Jean-Luc, I think he's got a nice expression when he's talking about the model like the Isteritz one, which is, if I want to change the atmosphere, I add a reed. And as I've demonstrated, there are multiple ways of producing sound, and I think we're very ingenious to try all these different versions, but whether we know or will find out which was their version or whether they were just as ingenious, I'm not sure.
Actually, I got a bit carried away then. The instrument made from a vulture radius came from Hollefels. Geissen Klosterle was the site which had sound-making devices made from a swan radius and mammoth ivory.
Thank you for that. We have another question about instruments in the past, specifically from Lika, who says, we had willow bark flutes in our childhood. Were those indeed instruments that would have been around in antiquity, do you think?
I do. I think they probably were. I've only made a couple that worked properly, and I think willow bark flutes, they're famous for having a lifespan of about maybe 2 weeks, because once they dry thoroughly, they start to crack. But it's interesting that willow bark flutes are often played as overtone flutes, which means they have no finger holes, but the harder you blow, you jump octaves, and so you can get maybe 3 or 4 notes by blowing slightly harder, and if you cover the end, you get another 3 or 4 notes. So you can play some remarkable tunes on them, and I'm very sure they would have had them in the past. And Lara has a recording on her SoundCloud channel, which is of some blowpipes being used to keep a fire going, and it's a nice rhythmic feel, but they could equally be used as overtone pipes. And I've got a recording I made that has about 7 or 8 notes from just a hollow tube of elder. When I go out, if I see an object that's got a bore, that is, it's a hollow tube, I think, wow, I bet I could use that. I've made instruments with nettles, with raspberry cane, bramble, elder, feathers. Anything that's hollow could be played.
Thanks. I remember we spoke at some point as well. You mentioned playing snail shells, I think.
Oh, yeah. Snail shells are cool. And play a snail shell with a whelk. You get a nice bass. A bass, no treble.
Sounds great. We'll have to try that again if anyone's interested in trying some snail shells next gardening trip. Lara, I actually have a question for you, because something like music, for example, it's sort of like someone was saying earlier, it kind of flows. It does have a process of sorts. Sometimes soundscapes can be a little bit more abstract, I suppose is the word. How do the sort of members of the public, so kind of non-specialists in this respect, engage with your work? Are they interested, intrigued, curious? Is there a particular difficulty or issue that you encounter through Abadir or your work in general?
Well, thank you. That's a very interesting question, I must say. So I think, how do I judge? I should be having in place some sort of checking. How is it received? How many plays do I have? I can actually tell you. I have 710 plays in total. So, the problem with this thing is that it is just an archive. I have no way to know whether people are actually engaging with them, if they're downloading them, and what they're doing with them, even if, they're all under a Creative Commons copyright. So, but the other thing, the main difficulty that I have is just laziness. Laziness of the people that I know have got hours and hours of soundscapes recorded everywhere, but they can't find the time, to send them to me for me to upload. And it's not a matter of copyright, because SoundCloud is a very smart platform. You can upload retaining your full copyright, but it's just a little bit of laziness. And again, this concept is not very easy to get through unless you actually listen to some of them, and then you can get a glimpse of what it was. It might be really something too abstract until they actually listen to them, until they actually pay attention to these things.
I do have to say, we were playing some of the audio earlier when we were doing sound checks, and there were one or two which I thought, what is that? And it's interesting to think and try and work out what it is. Yeah, I guess that's another way of approaching it, perhaps. Will the Abadir material be available after this year? What are your plans for the material that's currently presented there?
The material that has been uploaded is going to be there at least until SoundCloud ends. Once the material is there, it stays there, and it's free access for everyone. Maybe what's going to happen is that the person that manages Abadir is not going to work on it, so it's not going to be updated anymore. The material is going to stay there. The aim is to increase the quality of the soundscapes there, and maybe, do like a specific upload for one archaeological open-air museum, for example, that has got a particular soundscape to the activities they perform. And then if I cannot find a way to support the projects, it will just stay there forever for everyone to listen to.
We have a comment for Simon. She says, thank you both. This was very interesting and enjoyable. My question's an open one to Simon, and also to anyone listening or following along who make or work with ancient musical instruments. One of the EXARC members, the Ancient Technology Centre in Dorset, would like to get in touch with instrument makers and musicians for a potential ancient music festival next year. Oh, that sounds great. Or the year after. Sorry, getting too into this now. I don't have more information than this at the moment, but if anyone here is interested in doing that, you can contact Pascal, who is our wonderful EXARC chair. So her email is chair@exarc.net. Contact Marnie Shaw, who works for Dorset Council, so marnie.shaw@dorsetcouncil.uk. But potentially something you might be interested in.
Well, yeah. I think I've met, is it Anthony Whitlock? He works there, I think. I met him at the Wilderness Gathering. He gave me a very nice piece of worked flint.
Oh, lovely. Always nice to receive flint from people. I also have another question for you, Simon, from Rig again. I wonder if you know of any studies comparing the acoustics of locations with the instruments or the music used. I started an experiment comparing the sounds of different instruments, specifically lyres strung with different materials, in the various environments in and around the Norse Longhouse at Lons-aux-Meadows, so turf walls, timber walls, and outside, to see if the acoustics might have affected reconstruction choices. Is this something you also find?
Well, not with my reconstructions, because I'm basing them on what the original thing was made from. And I have a lyre that I'm working on, but I haven't done much with stringed instruments. But I can imagine you would appreciate a difference if you're working with a building, say, that has turf walls. I imagine very observant and less reflective of sound. And so it would be very, very obvious to someone playing. I think I'd suggest looking at Huddersfield University. Professor Rupert Till there has a lot of interest in the acoustics of place and has done recordings, part of the Songs of the Caves project, but also different periods, such as in Malta and in some rock gongs in Africa. But it's a fascinating vein of research, isn't it?
And actually, Roland has also just commented, I heard of a meticulously reconstructed church organ placed in the original church, but because the church had changed over the centuries, it was then still not possible to hear how it originally sounded.
Yeah. That's the problem with some of the Paleolithic caves, is known rock falls and things that have happened since the Ice Age. Often people have done some studies, but because the original entrance maybe is blocked now, it changes quite a lot of effects.
Yeah, very true, very true. For both of you, do you think it's necessary to have a more kind of official understanding of sound or of music before starting this type of research, or can anybody do it?
I think anyone can do it. As I said, I was in the choir as a kid, and my instrument that I turned to is violin, and I played lots of other things more or less well. But I think in some ways, it might be thought that having, say, a classical training could hamper trying to look at what we might think of as more primitive instruments, because from so long ago, if your frame of reference for music is more structured, organized ways of presenting sound. Kaiser Lund, who is one of the great pioneers of music archaeology, she has championed the term sound-making device rather than instrument, because there's no real agreed definition of what music is. In ancient Greece, it included dance and poetry. In Maya society, it's a similar thing. So I think maybe having a very rigid Western perspective on what music is can be a problem, maybe.
Yes, probably. In my point of view, since I am dealing with a wider perspective rather than just focusing on the pleasant, part, no, I wouldn't say that in my point of view, it's needed to have an education, because that's exactly the point. Sound speaks an international language. It goes beyond space and time. It goes beyond also whatever class you're in. So I would like to underline that my study is a social science study. So I'm studying contemporary society and how it relates to the visions of the past that come us in different formats. It can be material culture, replicas, and can also come into a sensory way. So what Simon is doing, I really like it, because I am not an artist, but I can appreciate art. So Simon is more yang, and I'm a little bit more yin. I'm in the receptive mode. I am a listener, and I also make sounds. Maybe I don't make music, but that's not the point. So it opens up a little bit more of attention also in the sensory aspects that, of course, they deal with the past, but we can also pay attention to what soundscapes we are experiencing now. For example, during lockdown, a lot of people, were sensing differently their own towns, were paying attention to birds singing and things they didn't hear before because of the usual background noises everywhere. So I believe that, in my perspective, work is a little bit more on the listener side. It is a bit more on the perception and the yin side.
That's a really good point. I believe it's thought that people who live in towns and cities, we have lost the 20 decibels of our hearing. Not that we don't have it, because we are so in tune with this noise of cars, motorways, planes all the time. Our brains have switched off to that lower level. And it'd be interesting maybe to make a comparison of people who live in some little hamlet up in the mountains with people who live in a city and see the difference between what they can appreciate. In the last 3 or 4 weeks, there's been an online forum of marine biologists in Italy who have been having an ongoing thing, and they're looking at soundscapes from an ecological perspective. And they say that the least understood aspect of a complex ecosystem, such as the ocean, is the manner of communication in the ocean. And sound is the most efficient means in the sea. But one thing that they have noted and said the human population needs to focus on is the need to reduce our impact of underwater noise, because it is really detrimental to the creatures that actually live there.
Yes, I think it was the study done on dolphins and how they actually could measure and record their interaction. And it was a fascinating study. And, I have to mention again Trevor, because one of the observations that he had when he played the first soundscape during the conference in Berlin was exactly that our senses are overwhelmed and are also a little bit more focused on the visual side. So by taking away the visuals and concentrating just on the sounds, we can try and focus again on something that we need to rediscover.
Here.
That's a good point. Quick question. What is your favorite, shall we say, result that you've encountered so far? So favorite soundscape or favorite instrumental reaction, for example?
I was given a challenge as payback because I challenged someone to learn to play end-blown flute. And as a payback, I was challenged to write a poem in reaction to one of my own model instruments. And so I set something to record and I improvised a tune, and then I sat down immediately and wrote a poem listening to this piece. And I was amazed at my poem, actually. And you'll have to have a wait, but I'm writing a paper exactly about that, which I discuss how by presenting museum visitors with sound, maybe we need to have their input for exhibitions through their poetic response to exhibits and the soundscape that goes with them.
In my point of view, the collected so far, I love. I like them all. There's not one that I don't like, and all they communicate different things. That's what I'm looking forward to do, and it's nice because I can tell Simon, I have here the first handmade flute made of elderwood in my hands, I can't throw any sound out of it. But Simon has given me very, very clear instructions, and I'm going to try until I can. It was one of the projects that came out after we actually chatted, and it's a beautiful object. I actually love it. So, I'm looking forward to maybe produce some sound out of it.
Man, that sounds great. I look forward also to hearing it up on Abadir when you're perfected it, Lara.
Of course.
You mentioned the visitors' interpretations. So Yus has asked, is there known visitors, so research of visitors on the effects of soundscapes on the public? Can you suggest any studies that have been done on this already?
The only one I know of is mine. Send me an email, I'll send you the paper.
Oh, perfect. So there you go, Yus. You can get it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Roland also asks, do you notice that archaeologists, maybe just some archaeologists, when understanding sound and its importance, are better able to sort of see sound in their material or their research? Do you know of any examples where your work has influenced archaeologists?
I see that he added another question. It's a really good question. Would you think for visually impaired people understand more about your audio? Can you say something about people don't? Yes, absolutely. And this is one of the most important things, But one example for people who study pottery, like me, I started being a pottery specialist. My professor used to pick up a sherd and then throw out a sound with her fingernails on it. And the higher the pitch, the better the firing. I think this is like a never-ending story. All the things that we talk about today, especially if there's collaboration between researchers, which is quite rare actually in experimental archaeology. We tend to be like lone workers, doing our own thing in our little world. But if we actually speak to people and collaborate with people and hear what they have to say to us, I think it's like a mutual, exchange. And I would really love to see it more established.
On that idea, there was a paper given at the International Study Group of Music Archaeology in 2008, and he was looking at bronze axes. It was a PhD he'd done, and he was talking about the fact that the sounds of the axes were quite remarkable. But what he could say is there would possibly that the better the sound, the better the quality of the bronze used. And that maybe when people were trading for bronze axes, they would know this, and so they would hit an axe before they traded for it to see if it was up to scratch, as it were.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was even just thinking, I remember meeting a lady who said that, if a watermelon is good or not is whether if you hit it, it makes a certain echo or something. So it's amazing how much sound is actually an important part of our life in that respect. I'm going to have to wrap up. So thank you very much to Lara and to Simon. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
And also, sharing your amazing work. It's fantastic to be able to actually share it. The great thing with audio is you can share audio too. I definitely learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners did too. So yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it was a fantastic experience. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you again.
And thank you to everyone else who is listening to this episode of Finally Friday by EXARC. If you would like to become more involved with EXARC, why not become a member? Alternatively, you can make a small PayPal donation through the website to help support EXARC in endeavours and hear about more fantastic projects like the ones you heard about today. But otherwise, see you next month for another episode of Finally Friday.